Hello, I'm Alan Davis. I'm an architect and heritage lead at BDP. Welcome to the first ever BDP podcast series. It's called Old Buildings, New Beginnings. In this series, we discuss the current thinking relating to the reuse of old and existing buildings. We will discuss topics including adaptive reuse, sustainability, accessibility, improving performance, as well as the cultural significance of keeping old buildings. Why build new when you can repurpose the old? Welcome to the conversation. So hello, this week we discuss in our series Old Buildings, New Beginnings, the question, can we make historic buildings inclusive for all? With me to discuss this question, I have some interesting colleagues from BDP. First of all, Jesse Klimitz is principal and architect in the Toronto studio and the director of Human Space, which is BDP's global inclusive design consultancy. So welcome, Jesse.
Thank you.
Secondly, we have Christine Davies, conservation architect in our Manchester studio.
Hello.
And David Artis, architect director in our London studio. Thank you all for joining. So I'm going to start by asking you to explain a bit about accessibility, inclusivity, and equality. When we think about inclusivity in architecture, we may immediately consider how we address physical barriers to using spaces and how we might improve accessibility. But is this the extent of what we mean by inclusive, accessible, and equal?
Yeah, so I think, and again, just touching on what you've just said there, Alan, for me, inclusion is the removal of barriers, and they're physical barriers, but they're also perceived barriers, because I think everyone's very familiar with the concept of step-free access and also looking at areas of sort of colour blindness, partial sighted, hearing impairments, and those kind of physical issues and barriers to being able to enjoy, appreciate, and experience our historic landscape. But it's more also about the perceived barriers, about the perception that people feel a building is not for them. I mean, particularly with very high profile buildings, such as town halls, civic buildings, they're buildings that were designed by men, for men, of a wealthy background, a privileged background. And how do you, in this modern age, welcome people into those buildings so that they feel engaged, they feel like it's a place that they should be, and they should be able to participate in the activities that happen there, and also enjoy the beauty and the artistry of that architecture, really.
Jesse, is this something that is a current theme in your research?
Yes, I think just to bridge off Christine's points, I think very very similar in that what we see as inclusivity in design means realizing outcomes to benefit a greater extent of people and their personal experiences. Inclusive design, in particular, is an approach that is used that focuses on the vast human experience and needs of our differences, and with respect to, for example, abilities, gender identity, age, race, neurodiversity, culture, socioeconomic status. These are ways in which we can look at and address inclusion within the built environment, and the ways in which these needs also intersect. And it offers an opportunity to problem solve, to innovate, and to explore solutions. So inclusivity in design is really about process and realized outcomes.
David, can I ask you, what do you think the problem with historic buildings is, or the problems with historic buildings are? Why is it that we are being challenged in this way by our historic buildings?
Well, I guess fundamentally it's a kind of the value systems that were in place when these buildings were conceived, built, very different to the value systems that we have now. And as kind of Christine mentioned, it's the kind of physical and emotional barriers that we have to break down to kind of liberate historic buildings to make them sustainable and enjoyable for everyone today. And that's the trick, isn't it? That's the skill and what we relish in the work that we do. And
in the case of Leighton House, what do you think the biggest barriers are there?
Well, I mean,
are they cultural or socioeconomic, or
they are? Yeah, I mean, the borough is very diverse. The borough desperately needs spaces where the community feel comfortable going, and where the community can enjoy, these very special spaces. I think we often talk of the sort of pedimented museum. Classical architecture, communicates a certain, way, and very simply speaking, at Leighton, the museum was approached by quite a grand flight of steps to the front door. Clearly, that immediately, sends a particular message. Part of our work is resetting the entry sequence so that there is an equality to another way in, which is as dignified as the historic entrance, but can still allow the historic entrance to read as the original key entry point. And yeah, I think one of the key issues with Leighton was being able to introduce a new lift. Now that is, giving the building step-free access on all floors for the first time in its history, and in a very compact sort of, domestic scale setting. That was perhaps one of the biggest challenges, is where you can situate building mass that is not going to undermine the character of the original building, allow the original building to read and be clearly understood. And that was always a big drive for the project.
You've picked up on a general characteristic of many historic public buildings, particularly from the great age of building, the 19th century period of colonialism. And those buildings tend to be grand and sometimes pompous, with grand steps up to them. And that is both problematic from a physical barrier point of view, but also from a psychological aspect. And for many people, it might say keep out rather than come in. It's exclusive rather than inclusive. Is that also, Jesse, your experience of public buildings in Canada?
Yes, it is. It is similar. Canada's celebrating its 155th birthday this year, and I think similarly, we're in Canada dealing with heritage sites that are heritage listed, heritage designated, from different decades and generations. And to David's point earlier, many of these buildings were created in a time when there were different considerations around the purpose of these buildings and how they're used today. And so I think it is problematic in the way that as we move from today and forward into the future, these buildings are becoming more and more used for everyone's enjoyment and experience, both from landmark locations for tourism, workplace environments, many different purposes for these buildings. And it's how do we successfully find ways to preserve their historical integrity while balancing these needs to make them accessible and inclusive to a greater number of people.
I guess we should then question, if these are such challenging or such imperfect buildings by today's standards, why is it important that we make them, that we correct them? There will be, I think, for us, particularly those of us who work with historic buildings, we may take it for granted. That's what we are used to dealing with. But there may be others, colleagues, who say, well, if these buildings are so imperfect, if they convey the wrong messages, if they're from a different era, why is it so important that we make them work?
There's many statistics out there, most recently from the World Health Organization, that recognizes the growing aging population and more evidence around the diversity of people and statistics from physical, social, or mental health perspectives, whether it be a disability or age related. There's a lot of evidence out there that is showing how diverse our global population is, and how we're also an aging population. And for those, for some of those reasons, I think that the importance of historic buildings are being used in different ways and will be used in many other ways in the future through adaptive reuse opportunities, or through just different occupancy needs. So we're seeing in Canada that the federal heritage building stock is from administrative buildings to banks, tourist attractions, retail spaces, all different aspects. And so it's really a balance of how do we create a usable and welcoming environment to a greater extent of people, while maintaining the heritage integrity of these buildings.
And so it's about richness and variety, as well as being capable of dealing with all the different demographics and the various types of ability and inclination. I guess one aspect we haven't touched on, but which is a very current topic in the UK, is contested histories. It's what buildings tell us, what architecture tells us about the past, and whether grand architecture, good architecture, always is allied with good things. A lot of our country houses, a lot of our wealth, a lot of our good buildings are the result of a period of history which also had its dark side. And I think that is something that we are grappling with in things such as the debate about statues, the debate about how the National Trust represents buildings and presents our buildings. And I guess that also speaks to the aspect of culture, identity. So I'd just like to investigate, again, with that kind of baggage, how do we deal with that in the historic environment with historic buildings?
Yes, I think, as you say, it's a very challenging topic, and welcomes a kind of a broad range of input from a wide variety of people's backgrounds. But just from a kind of a conservation architect's perspective, obviously, when we evaluate buildings, historic structures, we're looking at their heritage values, their history, their communal and evidential values. What do they tell us about the past experiences, which again can inform where we were and where we are now, which could be a positive thing if it's sort of directed in the right way and understood and interpreted in the right way. But I think one of the other challenges that people have sort of said, perhaps you could take something and just move it somewhere else, put it into a museum. But again, there's sometimes the significance of the thing that you're analysing is in where it's been put and why it is there. So again, it can be quite challenging to determine a good way to sort of represent these things in a way that they aren't barriers, that they don't cause offence, and that actually they can be used in a positive way. I'm sure David and Jesse have some good follow-ups to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting. It's like what power do we have as architects to make positive change, and how much can our interventions change perceptions, undermine preconceived ideas that are, inherent in fabric, in places, in spaces. It is, as we've said, time marches on, buildings change, the way buildings are understood changes, and we need to do what we can to help institutions reorientate or represent themselves through the work that we do. And creating physical spaces is a part of that, as much as digital representation, the way engagement happens more broadly. And I think it's, this is our opportunity. This is how we can help and how we can support a kind of more equitable society and an equitable built environment.
And I think there's a great potential to innovate and a great potential to co-create with equity deserving groups. I think through that a process of as Christine pointed out, conservation planning combined with accessibility and inclusive considerations for interventions would help to both mitigate the any detrimental impact to character defining elements, and as well be able to evaluate these places to support through the lens of inclusion. So I think it is a balance, and engaging and bringing others to the design process and getting input from a diverse set of people through that lens can also create opportunities that may not have been considered previously.
And I'm guessing, Jesse, that your methodologies involve. You mentioned the process earlier on in the discussion, and I guess there is a very detailed and careful stakeholder engagement process that becomes part of the design process in order to capture those particular aspects.
Exactly, and I'd say the Heritage for All research project that we're undertaking is very much about that process of inclusive engagement and co-creation and coming up with solutions. So it's about looking at it through the lens of inclusion at over 40 buildings across the country that are representative of the federal heritage building portfolio, and looking at it through the lens of mobility, cognition, through sensory considerations such as seeing or hearing, many different aspects to then understand those barriers and challenges, and then work with the heritage community as well to understand those considerations from a conservation point of view, and where the two can come together on the biggest priority issues to come forward with solutions and recommendations back to the federal government.
Great. I'm going to finish by asking you to do a bit of future gazing, and just for reference, I think our generation, my generation in particular, has seen the rise of the disabled lobby, as it was called in the early days, and the inclusion of requirements for lifts and stairs, and provisions for people with wheelchair disabilities, which is pretty much the sort of bottom, the basic aspect of accessibility. But that has grown during the time that I've been an architect, from very simple beginnings around 1980s, I guess, late 80s, and is very well established now in legislation. Jesse, you've referenced demographics, the aging population. So I'd like to have your opinions of what does the future look like? Well, what do we think will be the landscape in this respect, in terms of access, inclusion, equality, for building design, for the next generation, for the youngsters who are coming up after us?
Yeah, I think I'll just maybe take a stab at some thoughts around that. I think it is about the engagement process and thoughtful engagement, which I think is different in many ways to what's been done in the past, where there would have been guidelines or certain requirements or legislations in place that would have supported some of these considerations. And I think moving forwards, it's becoming more about designing with us, not for us. And I think that that through that inclusive design process and engagement is a way to move this challenge forward to find solutions. I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's just the way the industry is moving, and what clients and city policymakers and city builders and that's what they're looking for. So I think that's just one big change.
Great.
We're in a much better place these days. There's more understanding and more knowledge around persons with protected characteristics. There are people that we work with who are experts in enabling us to understand the needs and requirements of a very diverse population. And as Jesse said, design is a participatory process, and the more that we can engage with the broadest spectrum of users, ultimately the better the architecture is. We all want to create spaces that we can all come together in. We're lucky enough to work on some very prestigious, important buildings that are kind of key parts of our cities, key parts of our kind of cultural DNA. And I think even now, sort of post-pandemic, having places that people can come together in real, as it were, is becoming, is so critical to our own, societies and, where we can move forward.
Yeah, and just to sort of agree with David and Jesse there, I think one of the the core principles that BDP is founded upon is collaboration. It's collaboration between professions, but it's collaboration with the public. And I think we pride ourselves on the level of consultation that we undertake with clients, end users, and the wider public, the communities that these buildings serve. And I think it's just really important that we just meet people's expectations of where they are and what they need. And that can be through tours, talks, interpretations, but also sort of touching on, again, the discussion of art and statuary, commissioning new works of art that are representative of the background and the lives that people are living now, and sort of installing those in those places so that people can kind of really take ownership of enjoying those places and knowing that they do represent them as they are now.
Christine, David, Jesse, thank you for discussing inclusion in old buildings with me. It's always good to have a conversation with interesting colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne.